Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As you all know, we have a very interesting conversation today. The students are joining us now. Great to have you all with us. Students, as you know, will be live streaming the talk with Ambassador Ovink. So let me just welcome you all to this event. My name is Christina Elson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for the Study of Capitalism at Wake Forest University. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to the first of this speaker series on managing people and places to meet the global challenge of rising water. These talks tick many boxes for the Center for the Study of Capitalism. We see capitalism as an evolving and dynamic system, and we consider that well-functioning capitalism demands a constant reflection on our goals as individuals and our desire to contribute to our families, communities, and society as a whole. So this series touches on two key areas of interest for us. One is, how might we mitigate current crises and manage the natural world ethically while still supporting global development? And another is really, how might we create businesses, communities, and government systems that foster individual creative potential and general prosperity? So we're thrilled to be part of bringing this series to you. And of course, this is with the interest and efforts of Terry van Dijk of the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, Russell Shorto with the New York Historical Society, Saskia Pardens of the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the US, and of course, with the initial participation of our first speaker, Ambassador Ovink. So let me now pass it over to Professor van Dijk, who will moderate today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Christina. Thanks for all being here. American students, American co-workers, colleagues of us, Dutch students, Dutch experts, and Dutch colleagues of us. Why are we here? Well, because we were in a meet with Christina Elson and Russell Shorto, me and a colleague, Annette Kempenaar, and we were discovering our joint fascination for the fact that a lot of American cities have been and still are trying to adopt a new way of protecting themselves against climate change and rising sea levels. And they tend to look to the Dutch practices as a potential way forward. And after New Orleans and New York, there's more cities that are in this process. And there's a lot of academic questions, cultural, political, economical, legal, that are behind this question, like, hey, this adoption of Dutch practices to American situations. How does that work? Who takes it there? What happens? What is achieved so far? Does it deliver? Really intriguing in a global world to see if we can also trade policies between countries. So we have a series of seminars, and because we thought we could go after answers to these intriguing questions ourselves, or we could invite young people, and those would be you. The Dutch people are from the honors program of Groningen University, which is a 2 hours drive from Amsterdam. So that's practically a suburb to American standards. And the students from Wake Forest University to discuss these questions, like why is it happening? Who does it? What does it deliver? Where does it happen? Those are really intriguing questions at this time, where climate change and the coasts where a lot of risks are happening are so high on the political agendas. So we have a number of sessions, and today, nobody less than award-winning and best-selling author, historian, and journalist Russell Shorto, who is an expert on the US-Dutch relationships, the Dutch heritage in the USA, and also much fascinated about this collaboration. And nobody less than Henk Ovink, in the water Sherpa, or the special envoy, or the water ambassador. He has had many labels, but a very experienced high civil servant in ministries and in international organizations. Also trying to get to this question, how can we make every place on the planet as water resilient, as water safe as we can? What do we have to do to make that happen? To you as students, when you might think we are, most of us, the adult people here, we are a gray, some first signs of hair loss or total hair loss, all kinds of variations. You might think these people, they know it all. And they're just gonna tell us how it works and how to see stuff. That's not what we came for. We are just like you, intrigued by this pattern, intrigued by this phenomenon. We want to have an equal, open, energized debate on the questions that we recognize, the patterns that we see, and how to take this further. So it's a unique opportunity for you in this seminar and the next ones to be able to, exchange ideas with these very interesting speakers. Don't be intimidated, don't tense up. They are very interested to hear what you think, what you have to ask. So write down the questions during the talks before we have the discussion, and make good use of this unique possibility to meet them, to learn more about the empirical setting, but also more about the more theoretical phenomenon of policy exchange and the climate adaptation question. I would propose to have both talks back to back because they're more interestingly discussed as a set. Save all the questions. You can also put questions in the comment box during the talks. Maybe the speakers see it. When they're really important, I might intervene into the talks to have a little answer to those. And then after those two talks, we will have an interesting debate together as equals on this fascinating pattern of this Dutch experiences and policies traveling across the planet, and also suspected to be useful for solving coastal defense problems and other water problems in other places on the planet. I expect, or we time it as such a way that we can close in 2 hours from now. So we have interesting talks, debate with you that I will moderate as good as possible. When there might be energy left after those 2 hours, feel free to leave the session. Maybe some people will continue deliberating and discussing after that. But after 10 Dutch time, which would be 4 Eastern Standard Time, feel free to discreetly leave the session and to continue with other things you might be doing. Are there any practical logistical questions from your side, dear students, that we need to get out of the way for you to fully be inspired by our speakers? No? Then use the chat box if you need to, and enjoy this possibility. And we hope we all grow from the interaction with each other, whether we are experienced or students, and that we will leave this session as enlightened and even smarter people than we were already. Yes, is that good? Then I would like to invite onto the floor the distinguished and also Dutch Knight, the Order of the Knight with a K, I mean, Russell Shorto, to tell us what he likes to tell us about the Dutch, the Americans, and the future. Russell.
Thank you very much, Terry. I want to welcome everybody. We've got a few different groups of people I want to kind of address separately. We've got people from Wake Forest and beyond who are not students, so welcome to you. The students who are from Groningen, welcome to you. You have I think you have the prettiest university in the Netherlands, and it's a distinguished institution. To the fellow panelists or organizers, I want to thank them, Christina Elson, Terry van Dijk, Henk Ovink, who was instrumental in bringing this together, Saskia Pardans from the Dutch Embassy and Consulate in Atlanta. And then lastly, the students from Wake Forest, I'm your professor in this course, whether you knew that or not. But you know, it's a little strange how we have this set up. We arranged it so we've got these 6 speakers in these first 3 sessions. And since I'm the first speaker, we agreed that Terry van Dijk from Groningen would be the kind of teacher, the moderator for today. But so my students at Groningen, for the next 3 classes, this is how we'll interact. Otherwise, on Canvas, that's where I'll post assignments. There'll be an assignment every week. And then after the 3rd class, there'll be a project posted to work on, and that'll be the main project. And that, I don't know what it is yet, because as Terry said, I'm hoping to learn from these speakers and then to kind of formulate the project from that. And I guess the last thing I want to say is that I see myself today as the warm-up act, because, you know, Henk Ovink, who, if you're paging through your screen, the dapper looking gentleman in the black suit with the black tie, he is, to my mind, I'm not joking, the person on water management, resilience in the world today. So I want to reinforce how special it is that you get time with him. And I'm going to speak, then he will, and then we'll have time for questions. And I'm happy to take questions, but I would suggest, for the most part, give me my questions next week or something, because this is really your time. You know, this is a special time with him. So with that said, I am going to share screen. Did that work? I think it said share host disabled participant screen sharing. What do I do? Our first glitch.
Michelle.
Try again, Russell. I think I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I got it. Okay. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes, we do, Russell.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you know, these are 6 talks, and 5 of them are by experts in water management, resilience, how to deal with climate change. The one who's not an expert is me. And when I was working with the others to set up this course, my background, I'm a writer of history and a journalist, and I see myself as an interpreter and as a storyteller. And so I, from the beginning, thought that I would do the first talk as a way of helping to orient and to give perspective, historical perspective. And in particular, being an American who has a long relationship with the Netherlands and with the issue of water and Dutch history. I want to look at the problem of water in dealing with it in America, and looking at Dutch history and how it is that the Dutch became the experts that they are. So, so I'm calling it Sea Change, Dutch History from an American Perspective. I have to say that this image I stole from the cover of a book called Sweet and Salt by a good friend of mine, Tracy Metz, who's, like me, an American interpreter of the Netherlands. And I just think it's a great image. So let me begin with the question of why the Dutch. Why are the Dutch, you know, the people to go to for water? And I think it has a lot to do with their own geography, their own landscape. So let me begin by contrasting the Netherlands with the rest of Europe in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, because the Netherlands was relatively late to be settled in Europe. You know, of course, we know Rome and Greece, other parts of Europe go back into the mists of time. people began migrating in the Middle Ages to the Netherlands, and that's largely to do with the relative inhospitability of the landscape, because it's called the Low Countries. It tends to flood. So to understand how it developed, I want to contrast it with Europe in the Middle Ages. And that begs the question, what was Europe in the Middle Ages? When I think of Europe in the Middle Ages, one image comes into my mind, this one. Maybe it comes into your mind. If you don't know this image, if this reference means nothing to you, in a way I pity you, because you don't know Monty Python and the Holy Grail. On the other hand, I think you're lucky because you get to see it for the first time. It's a spoof on the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But the Monty Python people did a lot of research into the Middle Ages. And so it is accurate in a funny kind of way, because the Middle Ages in most of Europe was built on what economists call the manorial system. So society was organized around, you had a manor, which is an estate with a fancy house, a castle, and a nobleman, a knight, who lives there and who controls that land and the people who live on it. And they are from different walks of life. This system was stable. It lasted for hundreds of years, and it was fixed, meaning wherever you were in that system, if you were a peasant working the land, if you were a carpenter, if you were a scribe, if you were the nobleman, your children and your grandchildren were probably going to occupy that same run. That system did not take hold truly in the Netherlands. And the reason has to do with land. This is a body of water in the center of the country called the Kromme Rijn. And here in 1122, a group of people who lived around here got together and they made a pact that they would do what was necessary to control the water. Because as people moved there, they discovered when the spring rains came, their crops flooded, their houses flooded, so they had to do something to deal with that problem. That happened earlier, we know. I think going back to about 900, there are indications that in parts of the Netherlands, they were controlling water. But 1122 is the first written record we have. That little blue line shows you where this was. It probably won't mean much to the Americans. Where's my pointer? Here's Amsterdam there, and there's Rotterdam. So sort of in the middle of nowhere, although apologies if that's where you're from in the Netherlands. They created effectively a water board. The Netherlands then, these developed all over the country. This is, as of 2019, the water boards. They regulate, they keep the country dry, essentially. Every Dutch person, whether they know it or not, pays a water tax. So this system goes back to the very beginning of the country, the very beginning of Dutch society and culture. These images, the one on the top is showing part of the southern Netherlands, Zeeland. It's a little bit hard to see, but there's two shades of blue. The lighter blue is the water. The darker blue is land that in the event of severe flooding will be flooded, even though there are substantial defenses in place against that. The image on the bottom shows what that would look like in the event of flooding if those defenses were not there. The Dutch have a saying, God made the earth, but the Dutch made Holland, Holland meaning the Netherlands. And they mean it literally. A significant portion of the country is polder, reclaimed from the sea, and a larger portion of the country is protected, otherwise it would flood. These are examples. When I first went to the Netherlands, I was kind of, I heard about the famous polders, and then I was on the train through the countryside, and I'm thinking, well, where are the polders? I don't see them. I guess, you have to have it pointed out to you. So in this case, the road is running across the top of the dike, and the polder, the reclaimed land, is the lower land on the sides. Here, the road and the houses are on a dike, and then the land over to the left is polder. This, you can see very clearly that the land on the right is actually below the level of the water. This is the crazy conundrum that is the Netherlands. It is a, from an American perspective, it's just wondrous what a manufactured landscape it is. You kind of feel like people shouldn't live here, but they do, and they've really more or less perfected these techniques. Okay, let me take you through an example. This is an artist's rendering of a situation where you have a river that flows from the bottom to the top. And this is the Middle Ages. Say this must be around 1150 AD or 1200 AD. And people, after having their homes flooded, they built the dikes along the sides. They built a dam to control the water. They have the road running across the top of the dike. Their houses are safe behind the dike. They dig trenches to let the water drain so they can farm the land. This is the Amstel River. This is the Amstel Dam, and that is where the name Amsterdam comes from. This is the same Amstel Dam about 4 centuries or so later. This is the Dam Square in the center of Amsterdam. This is recognizable today. This building, the Nieuwe Kerk, the church is there. Here, it being built is another building that is still there, which is now called the Royal Palace. You can see the masts of ships here. This is the river running here, and the dam runs over here. Here it is, the same place from more recent times. This area, this whole area where this kind of circus was, this was unusual. This is not typical. There's not always a circus there. This whole area is the dam. This is the building, the Royal Palace. This is the new church. And the river ran down here. It was covered over. And if you look at this image, now we're on the dam square. We're in the middle of Amsterdam, but we're on a dam. So you can see how the whole city, everything is about water and managing it. So we're on the dam, looking down the river, which is covered over, and that is the central train station, which is blocking our view of the water there. A map of Amsterdam. This is I don't see the date, but I think this is probably around 1650. Which just to orient you here, here's what we were just looking at. This was the beginning of the city. The river goes all the way, see how it winds up there. Here's the dam. So the medieval city then was built, it grew around this area. You see, they built these canals to control that problem of water and turn it to advantage so they could maneuver on the canals. Then the whole Dutch economy, society took off starting around 1600, and this great building boom begins. And they laid out this massive urban planning operation. They laid out the whole city, this whole, you can see here. And the reason I say this must be from about 1650 is they started that in about 1610, and this redder, darker area is where they were at this point. So all this is buildings and bridges and so on that have been built. All this is still that they have yet to work on. So this is, you're seeing, and this was going on in cities around the Netherlands. You see all the ships in the harbor, what a booming moment this was. And again, it's all around water. These canals here, these are the major canals of the 17th century city, which again, they form this belt, this ring around the city to turn this problem to an advantage. Why did this happen? Why did this economic boom take off? Going back to what I started with, this notion of, that kind of Monty Python image, that fixed society where you were locked into a certain place in life. When this happened in the Netherlands, it kind of set off a chain reaction. It kind of flipped a switch in the mind. This is my kind of simplistic way of looking at it, so that they began to innovate. They began to realize that by reclaiming land, they would divide it up into people in the village. You have land that didn't exist before, that wasn't owned by a church or a nobleman. It was yours. So you had your own plot of land and you could use it to make money. People grew crops, they raised cattle on it, they bought and sold the land. And this sets off, as I say, a kind of entrepreneurial instinct that builds then until in 1602, it reaches a kind of climax with the establishment of the world's first multinational corporation, the Dutch East India Company. This is a share of stock. This is ones you see at the bottom, is dated 1606. So they invented this notion of a multinational company in which anybody can buy shares and take part in this growing enterprise. And the enterprise was going around the world and getting stuff and bringing it back. The Dutch East India Company went everywhere. People were proud of it. This is from a gable stone that was above your doorway in a home. The Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, the United East Indies Company. People were proud of this venture. It made them wealthy. This is the headquarters in Amsterdam of the East India Company. The building is still there. It's part of the University of Amsterdam. This concept of buying and selling shares of stock then leads to, well, we need a place to do this. So the first stock exchange, this is it as of about 1610, 1612. You see people, all this activity there, and you note that it's right on the water. Let me back up here. This image, here's the water going down to the harbor, the river. This building here is a later iteration of the stock exchange. That original one was built straddling the water. So you can see how elemental water remained to the society, to the culture, and to this awareness of this ability to thrive and make money. An image inside the stock exchange. This is just quickly showing you the Dutch East India Company, how vast its operations were, and the largest company in the world up to that point. This is this fellow and his wife. He's the director of the East India Company outpost in Batavia in what's now Indonesia. This is the East India Company outpost in Bengal in India. And by the way, the East India Company did all kinds of colonialism, slavery. I'm talking here about energy that was unleashed. I'm not talking about it in value terms. There are pluses and minuses to it in value terms. So that's one aspect of this boom that I think in many respects goes back to water. This is what makes the Dutch different from most of the rest of Europe at that time. Another way of looking at that same situation is books, publishing. This is an image of the university library in Leiden. There's a remarkable statistic, a calculation that was done at the University of Amsterdam in the 1970s, that approximately 1/2 of all books published in the entire world in the 17th century came out of the Dutch Republic, out of this, out of this tiny country. That, I think, is another way of looking at this phenomenon, this explosion of, what I said before, this switch that's flipped in the mind, and this realization that we can explore, we can expand, we can grow. Another way, this painting by Rembrandt shows, I think, 3 of those different manifestations of this outward expression in different directions. One is art. Suddenly, Dutch art takes a turn toward the secular and toward the real world. What are real people doing now? So this man at the center in black, Nicholas Tulp, was mayor of Amsterdam, and he was a surgeon, and he commissioned Rembrandt to paint him, being a show off and being the center of things. And he's giving a public anatomical demonstration. So it's showing this new focus on the individual, because as these people had this sense of themselves as powerhouses, as entrepreneurs able to make money, that focused the intention on themselves in a new way. So that changes art. It also, science and medicine, grinding lenses, manufacturing medical equipment, and then you also see a book there. So publishing, all of those aspects of what was taking off in the Netherlands are then part of, are captured here. One more aspect of this change, there's this writer, Witold Rybczynski, has a wonderful book called Home, A Short History of an Idea. And he argues in it that the Dutch in the 17th century basically invented our modern idea of the home as an intimate personal space for an immediate family. Before that, in Europe, a home was amorphous. There were multiple generations, there were servants and animals and who knows what. These Dutch houses, each of these was built for a family, a man and his wife and their children. And they all, as you can see, it's on the canal, and they all go back again to water. That notion, this modern notion of a family, even in a sense, goes back to this, can be related to that connection to the water. So these houses all have, you see, and the Dutch students know this, what's called a hoist beam at the top. There's a beam with a hook on it. So these people were entrepreneurs, many of them, who had ships that would sail the world. And you could be one of these people and travel all the way to the Spice Islands and do your, procure your pepper or cinnamon or whatever it was, travel on the ship all the way. Let me back up here a second. Where's my map? All the way back to the harbor, load your goods onto a smaller vessel, and then go up the canal right to your door. And with a rope and a hoist and a pulley, hoist it. So the way the houses were constructed, the idea was the man would do his business. This was his office where he'd meet the public. Upstairs were the living quarters for the family. And in the attic was where you stored your goods. So you could hoist your stuff in there. It was this remarkable way in which an individual could sort of use these canals almost like arms, where you're reaching out and embracing the world and bringing its goods into you. So that's how the Dutch built this up in the 17th century, this empire. After a Dutch East India Company, there's the Dutch West India Company, whose order of the day is to do business with the West Indies. That is the Atlantic, South America, the Caribbean, and North America. And notable among its colonies was the one called New Netherland, with its capital of New Amsterdam at the southern tip of Manhattan Island, which of course becomes New York. This is the Costello plan of New Amsterdam. This is the financial district of the city today. You see, they built a canal. There are houses with gables. There are windmills. It's a very Dutch place. This is a contemporary painting, very accurate painting of what it probably looked like by a contemporary artist named Len Tantillo, that I think gives you a flavor, but it's kind of a mix between a Dutch town and like a Wild West town. This is that landscape today. This is Manhattan. This is what that created. And to some extent, I think you can say that energy transferred here. But here's what I wanted to point out. The river, the harbor, they were very focused on water. Their territory, their colony of New Netherland, was essentially this whole portion. This map looks a little bit turned on the side, but it's otherwise quite accurate. This is Long Island. This is Massachusetts. This is the eastern seaboard of North America. And you can see they labeled it New Nederland, New Netherland. Over here, they labeled their neighbor New Engeland, New England. But what I wanted to show you was, if you were a Dutch resident of New Netherland, the way you saw this map was by its three river spines: the South River, which is the Delaware River, the North River, which is the Hudson, and what they called the Fresh River or the Connecticut River. That's how they oriented themselves. And they were very aware that the Hudson River went up and connected into the interior, and it was all about the future and getting into the interior. This is a slightly simpler map showing that what I was just showing you with the modern states. And the name of the game initially was about getting animal furs and bringing them down the rivers to Manhattan and then shipping them to Europe. But that shows you this awareness they had of going, of maneuvering via the water. This is from the 1820s then. Now we're past the Dutch period. The kind of dream they had of exploiting the interior of the continent starts to become a reality, because by then the Erie Canal is built, which bridged gaps in the Mohawk River. So that allowed for travel from anywhere in the world to Manhattan, up the Hudson River, along the Erie Canal, into the Great Lakes. So all the cities in the heartland, Chicago and Detroit and Duluth and Buffalo, they all take off. New York City becomes this big powerhouse. And in a way, they are, the Dutch were prefiguring that, that whole move in American history. This handsome fellow is James, the Duke of York, and in 1664, he authorized the English invasion. And so from then on, the place was not under Dutch control, and it was called New York. So I'm going to leave New York now, and I'm going to come back to the Dutch and the polder model. The polder model is this term that people use in different ways, and I'm using it broadly to refer to this kind of collectivist impulse. So the water, focusing on the water, needing to band together to build dams and dikes creates this collectivist impulse. We have to work together or we'll be underwater. At the same time, what that did, once they had this reclaimed land, it created this unusually strong sense of individuals, you know, these individuals who got rich and were able to travel the world. But they, you know, for the most part, they remained aware that their strength as individuals was related to the collective. And if things are going well in Dutch history, I think it relates to the idea that those two things are in balance, the collective sense and the individual sense. This image is from the 17th century. When you were building these canal houses, the soil is unstable. So they needed to be supported by piles. So what these men are doing, they're pulling ropes that are driving a huge iron pile driver that was slamming a tree trunk as a pile down into the soil. And you needed to embed dozens of these to support a single house. So to me, this is a nice model of that collectivism. This is a very different model. This is something that the Dutch system has that the American system does not have. The American system of government, the federal government, you've got the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch. And as we all know, they fight not only between the branches, but the political parties fight. The American system is really based on confrontation and locking horns. The Dutch system does that as well. If you ever watch the Dutch Tweede Kamer debates, they bicker and argue and yell at each other, but they have other checks on that. And this group is comprised of business leaders, labor leaders, and government leaders. And they kind of sit on top of the government, and on important questions, they get together and they debate it, and they try to come up with a unanimous view on it. And when they do, they present that to the government. And when that happens, the government usually takes that position. So it's a way of enforcing what I think of as the polder model, that you know, we all have to find a way to act together. It's a check against you know, individualism. That is not to say that the Dutch are, you know, all about collectivism. So I put these images in there. You know, I was totally thrown off when COVID happened. I thought the Netherlands are going to have this. They know about banding together when you need to. I was totally wrong. They are just as messed up about it as Americans are. That sign on the left says COVID vaccine is poison. You've got demonstrations protesting the government's policy. There's this, you know, new individualism in the country, which is very much at odds with that kind of collectivist mentality. Nevertheless, I'm going to try to move quickly here. Other ways of looking at this, what I'm thinking of is the polder model mentality. This is a map of the Netherlands showing all the existing train tracks in the country. The Netherlands is about half the size of California. That's a lot of train lines. This is a map of the US showing every train line. Look at Wyoming. 6 times the size of the Netherlands, not a single train track. So, trains to me are all about the collective, right? We as a society saying we need to, put all this money and effort into doing this for our general good. So to me, that's another way of looking at that difference of mentality. I have to see my notes here. The United States, just focusing on the US and how it developed very quickly, the United States, just the name, the United States, that's a strange, why isn't it called something like France or Germany? It's because as it developed, these colonies they thought of themselves as individual sovereign entities. They printed their own money, they raised their own militias. Amendment 10 of the Constitution says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved for the states. So that's in there because it matters to this day. There are many of the battles in American politics are over states' rights, how much power and sovereignty the states have. So in the American system, you have a great deal of autonomy or self-governance within entities. The states, cities, townships, counties, each one of these has kind of a stay out of my business, don't tell me what to do mentality. That even extends into companies, NGOs. And I think that tendency has increased over time. This is a quote from Amy Chester, who's going to be speaking in our course next week from Rebuild by Design. She said this last week in an op-ed. Since the New Deal, the early 20th century, America has seen an increase of agencies siloed from one another on the local, state, and federal level, each responsible for their own narrow charge with their own budget. This model has served us well for decades. However, the climate crisis requires a new way of governing. So that's her making this same point about the problem of the structure of America. Another handsome devil, John Wilkes, I just put him in there as a representative of of how far back this tendency to individualism goes in America. He was an English politician during the American Revolution when most of England was fighting against America. He was in London arguing that the American colonies were exactly right. He was all about individual freedom. He was very controversial in England. The Americans loved him. For generations, people named their children John Wilkes something after him. Then a guy named John Wilkes Booth came along and assassinated America's most beloved president, Abraham Lincoln. So the name John Wilkes immediately went out of favor. But my point is, Americans are just obsessed with this idea of individual freedom. And, that is, to me, embedded in the notion of the cowboy. All, American heroes, action heroes, TV stars, they're all basically cowboys. Like, I individually am going to take care of this problem. Donald Trump was trying to enact that same pulling out of the climate deal and in so many other ways. I had here a series of images, which you're all familiar with, of flooding in different parts of America, of Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Harvey. This is actually not far from where I live in Maryland, and this wasn't a hurricane, this was just a freak flood. So we know what we're dealing with now in terms of water and what we have to face. Kadir van Lohausen is a Dutch photographer who has been documenting climate change around the world. This is Biscayne Bay in Miami. This is Miami. I love this image of his. This is Miami as well. Miami, he says, is currently the most vulnerable city in America. And it's vulnerable because it's built on limestone, which is porous. So whatever you build, the water seeps through the limestone. It's believed that the Miami Beach and Bay Area should be evacuated by 2060. So we know the scope of the problems, and this is what Henk and others are going to go into soon. Very quickly, some of the classic examples of Dutch water engineering today, the Maaslandkering, which is part of the Delta Works. This is part of the Delta Works. And this is a schematic showing you this series of barriers to protect from the sea. Newer projects, which you're going to be hearing about in Dutch thinking, include things like the sand motor, which the idea is you dump an enormous amount of sand at a strategic place and then let the ocean do the work of distributing it where it needs to be to protect the land. Room for the river is a project. It's a new way of thinking, relatively new in Dutch thinking. It used to be we just have to build bigger and bigger walls. Then they realized we can't keep doing that. So this is the city of Nijmegen in the eastern part of the country. And the river, every spring, it would flood as the river came out of Germany. And finally, they decided we have to make room for the river. So we're going to buy up all this land from people and cut a channel for the river and create an island. So you see the island here being in process, construction underway, and the finished product. So this kind of thinking is one aspect of the new thinking. Okay, 2013, in the guise of Henk Ovink, who's about to take over for me, the Dutch returned to New York. After Hurricane Sandy, there was we need new thinking. This siloed American thinking isn't doing it for us anymore. Henk put together, which he will probably talk about, something called Rebuild by Design, which was a collaborative approach to dealing with problems regionally. One aspect, one outcome of that is what's called the Big U. This is a concept to protect Lower Manhattan. This is essentially part of that. This is the East River, and this is kind of room for the river. So there's parkland created, and then in the event of flooding, that can flood so as to save the rest of the land. This is another model of that. Rebuild Design had resulted in a number of projects in the New York area. And then things got problematic. New York City did what Americans tend to do, where you kind of retrench and say, you know what, we're going to do it this way. So to my mind, and I'm interested to hear what Henk says about this, there's been some, significant backtracking. Why should we believe what the city says? People are starting to argue with one another. The cowboy mentality isn't just in people. It's in cities, it's in states. I was on Long Island with the mayor of a city after Hurricane Sandy and talking about, this picture wasn't from there, but it's representative. They had put these kind of water breaks along the beach to protect the houses behind. But the water breaks stopped and the houses just kept going. And I said, why does the barrier stop there? And the mayor said, well, because that's the town line. So in other words, the mayor of the next town didn't want to do that. And that to me is the American problem in a nutshell, because that's the town line. The last image, and then I'm going to turn it back to Terry, is, I don't know where this is. I don't remember. Terry, maybe you know. Somewhere in the Netherlands, I was there, and this is a statue, an art project to represent, in the 19th century, there was this Dutch, there was this fairy tale of a Dutch boy who spots a leak in the dike and sticks his finger in it and becomes a hero, saves the town from flooding. I was talking to a Dutch friend of mine, an architect, a few years ago, and somehow we were talking about this. And he said, first of all, you realize that was written by an American. And he said, it's nonsensical. It wouldn't make sense to a Dutch audience. And I said, why is that? And he said, because it's an individual hero, like Spider-Man or something. It's an individual hero, and that's not the way this system works in the Netherlands. He said, he thought about it and he said, probably if a Dutch person had written that story, the waterboard would be the hero, but it probably wouldn't be a very good story. That to me is that story in a nutshell. I'll leave it there. I will stop my share, and Terry, I will give it back to you.
Thank you so much for this, Russell. Thank you. It's an excellent painting of the cultural backdrop of the cowboy cities, becoming aware that you can't solve this in a cowboy way, and then asking for the merchant from the places where they centuries long have always been aware that you have to do it together, that you have to organize, otherwise it wouldn't work. It would just be impossible to live at that place. So the cowboy is asking the merchant, what shall we do? And then the big question is, what happens next? And Henk has a lifetime of stories, backstories, amazing meets, amazing attempts, and lots of intriguing examples on what happens then when across cultures you try to see if you can make your place work the way the other people's places work. Henk, take us along in some of your enormously well-filled suitcase of experiences and examples.
And thanks, Terry. But first of all, Christina, Michelle, Saskia, but especially Russell. Thank you for organizing this. Great to see so many students online. And Russell, thanks so much for your inspirational talk. I was immediately making notes and trying to figure out how I can incorporate part of what you said better into how I talk about this. So thanks so much. I will, of course, try to take you also on a little tour. Of course, it's going to be a little bit different. My background is different and the work I do is different. Russell already explained. And I'm on a mission, so I want to share something with you because I'm very concerned because I actually in the context of the challenges we face, there are no silver bullets and that means that figuring out how to do this will demand a real collective effort, collectivism, where the polder model will look like, well, whatever, nothing. So that definitely is not enough. So with that, I'll try to share my screen, which I just did. And I hope you can see this. You do? Yeah, okay, cool. Now, this is not the US nor the Netherlands. This is the South Pole. You look from the south up, you see the African continent. And this is the image taken by Apollo 17 in 1972. And it's probably the first snapshot taken from planet Earth. Very expensive snapshot. Took quite a bit of decades to do it again. This snapshot shows and was used by the environmental community way back as a, as a token, as a logo. We only have one planet. We have to take care of it. 1972, we're saying the same things as we're saying now. 50 years later, we just resonate the same message, and we used it, this planet, as that logo. And that's a reason why I said the other reason is that they called it the blue marble, and well, it's pretty blue, and that is because a little bit over 70% of the surface of this planet is covered with water. So that gives you the feeling that everything's water in the world. That water is, there's an abundance, who cares? Why do we need to take care of that water? But what I will do now is I take a big vacuum cleaner and I take all the water of the planet. And funny enough, or not funny, it doesn't become a Swiss cheese. It's not all of a sudden there are big holes in it and you can look through it. Turns out there's only paint. Water is only on the surface. And while the ocean can be miles deep, in the context of the size and the scale of planet Earth, it's nothing. It's paint. And if I put all the water the planet has, all Earth's water, liquid fresh water, lakes, rivers, etc., and put it in a sphere, the sphere is not even the size of the United States. So all of a sudden you understand, like, whoa, I thought we had a lot. It actually turns out there is not a lot. And then you have to understand that is all the water. And only 0.4%, even a little less, of this water is the water we can use for human consumption, industrial use, agriculture, and so forth. And that is this little tiny thing. I don't know what, is it Atlanta? No, probably not. Atlanta's a little bit here, but here. This is the water we, the billions of people around the world, can use and have to take care of. Challenge number one. We're in the midst of a pandemic. And I'm not sure, but I hear parents, doctors, world leaders, your brother, sister, friend say, wash your hands. Very normal thing to do when there is a tap in your house or in your around the corner or somewhere in a park. Over 2 billion people in the world lack access to safe drinking water. Over 3 billion people lack access to hygiene facilities, and over 4 billion lack access to sanitation facilities. That actually means that a quarter to a third of the world actually really does not have this first line of defense. And this is, of course, mostly a problem for the developing world. But even in the context of the US, safe water is not a guarantee. Cheers, Russell. And you know the story of Flint and many other aspects, but there is no guarantee. And that means that knowing that we have a little bit of water and that we don't have access to it, and then not even take care of it, it's problematic. Third, it's complex. The challenges are complex. It's not that you can say, oh, we have a water problem and a climate problem and a gender problem and an ecological problem, and they're all nicely boxed, and we go one by one, and then, at the end of the day, we fix a box and we get over it. No, the interlinkages and the stacking of these challenges only makes the world more vulnerable. And it turns out where that vulnerability is stacked in the most layers, this is where, of course, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized live. So a pandemic then might not be their biggest problem, say parts of Africa, young population, pretty okay, but in the context of migration, droughts, terrorism, gender, the result of colonialism, international and geopolitical interest, all of a sudden a pandemic, a flood, a storm or a drought can be a tipping point for those societies. And then climate. And we all know climate change used to be something abstract for the future, for policymakers or people often on the more progressive side of society. But, since quite a bit, climate change is here and now. And this is not about the future. This is about today. With floods, droughts, wildfires, every year we have records. And we don't want to be the Olympic winners of all these disasters. We don't need those records, as we had this year in Europe, as well as in the US and Canada. Those challenges of climate change need to be addressed. And then going back to water, 90% of all those disasters are water related. So there is this thing with water. It can break society, economies, our environment. But if we take care of it, it can also mend it. Come back to what Russell said, if we understand water's capacity and are able to organize ourselves around it and manage it, we might be able to deal with these bigger challenges. But then this is not the way. A bunch of white male 50+ engineers sitting in a room thinking that they can find a silver bullet. No, this is not about finding a silver bullet. This is about defining a process of collaboration, action, and inclusion. And this is also a little bit the contrast of current politics in the world, especially in the developing world, including the Netherlands, where We think we can lock ourselves in and find solutions for societal problems where there is a big disconnect what is actually happening in that society. I'm not to say that every white male 50 plus, I'm white 50 plus male, so I'm not sure which side of history I will be looking back then, but I'm pretty sure this guy is on the good side, and I want to use this quote to explain it a little bit. Secretary General Guterres of the United Nations said, "This is the time for science and solidarity." Perhaps also in the context of this talk, there couldn't have been a better Dutch way of explaining it. Or Russell could have found a quote somewhere way back in history, somewhere in the Netherlands, that science and solidarity are the main pillars, drivers on how to progress. And then science in its biggest interpretation. This is about understanding, about data, about accessibility of the data, about capacity, going by facts, really knowing. And solidarity is not only taking care of your little brother or sister or your father and mother and grandfather and mother. No, this is about really leaving no one behind and setting up a system, formal and informal, where that level of collaboration is ensured. So solidarity in its biggest sense, leaving no one behind, but also figuring out what the institutional capacity comes with that. So as a start on where we are, then to the relationship to the Netherlands and the story of water. New reports came out in the last 2 to 3 years. The latest one is and this is from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is a panel of thousands of scientists, what Guterres was also relating to, addressing the risks and opportunities that come with the changing climate. And the one on the front is the latest one, the AR6 report. It tells us, really, scientists tell us, yeah, it's man-made climate change. We did it, so we have to undo it. And time for action is over. If we don't do it now, forget about it. But there's this sliver of hope in the report. It can be done. If we change everything, 1.5 degree is still within reach. And then on the back, 3 reports. I want to focus on the middle one. But on the right, you see the ocean and cryosphere, which is about sea level rise. Very important, of course, for coastal cities around the world, or a country like the Netherlands that is lying below sea level, and the global warming 1.5 report that shows the differences between 1.5 and 2. But the middle report, I think, is the one that helps us inform what we need to change and how big the challenge actually is. It tells us that almost every dollar we spend in the world, 9 out of 10, even 9.9 out of 10, is increasing climate change, and the way how we spend it, how we develop our cities, infrastructure, and economies, is making us more vulnerable. And that means that there is hope in the 1%, you could say, but there's a definite lack of finding ways and opportunities to scale that 1%. Now, that is so this is the challenges, and then we're off track when it comes to climate action. We see floods and droughts everywhere. That the most marginalized are hit hardest in our cities, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. And to conclude there, it's not the doom, but the challenges, I would say, is that looking back, way back, all the way back where the Netherlands started and the US started, and we started to colonialize the world, and then, following the dollars instead of following values, we created a world that is now on a track of only increasing climate change and making us more vulnerable. So that is not the way to go. Replicating the past is the worst, is our worst mistake. And there is a business case for that level of investment, that siloed, single-focused, stupid infrastructure. And with every dollar we spend in that way, we become more vulnerable. So we have to find a way to flip that around. And we think we found that way by creating this very Dutch agenda of the future, looking at every aspect and value of society. So looking at the future where we talk about leaving no one behind, eliminating poverty, hunger, ensuring health and well-being, quality of education, gender equality, water, clean energy, these and so forth and so forth. 17 goals that you cannot cherry pick from. You can't say, oh, I'll take gender. Will you do industry? I like peace. Will you do life on land? And then my partner will focus on health and I do a little bit of climate action. No, all these goals are interrelated. This is where the challenge comes in. There is no, again, silver bullet to fix those goals. It really demands a comprehensive, inclusive, and collaborative way forward. That's again grounded in perhaps where we started, where Russell started. How did we deal with the environment in the Netherlands? We knew we had to take care of it. We lost that connection right now, but in the way past, there was that opportunity. The Sustainable Development Goals, together with the Paris Agreement, help us define an agenda of the future, because we know if we continue on the existing path, there is no future. But the opportunity is there, because these development goals and that future agenda can help us proactively develop the best interventions ever. And this is not about technology, no, and this is not about geoengineering. No, this is about people. We know that we spend billions on the interventions, but we need to spend millions on the capacity of the people, the communities, the enabling environment, their knowledge, their ideas, as well as their institutions, the level of accountability, transparency, democracy, or at least the possibility in each culture to have that accountability back and forth. So investing in people is the way to invest in the projects and interventions. And economists agree, if you do that right, you maximize opportunities, but you also have opportunities that have a higher return on investment. And I would be a bad water ambassador if I would not say that investing in water has a trickle-down effect across all these sustainable development goals. It's women and children that walk the wells with water. It's women and children that spur their economies and their societies. It's because of bad water, biodiversity loss. It is with good water quality that we can help revitalize our wetlands and create opportunities to limit carbon emissions, adapt and build resiliency, create a healthy environment and a healthy economy. And it's these interdependencies that are of critical importance. But it's complex. And I want to go back to something Russell said. If you put such a complex approach in front of any decision maker, being it the US or anywhere else, this is what happens. They take it apart. So a complex problem does not fix the box of the past. We created this reality of non-responsive approaches, single-focused infrastructure, business cases that went with it. So you could say this box is the way our society, our business cases, our way of addressing profitability is added. So if you bring in a nature-based solutions, a wetland, it doesn't fit the box. So what do policymakers, investors, and decision makers do? They take it apart. So it starts to fit all these silos. They take all these SDGs apart again, instead of saying, hey, this is one comprehensive agenda. So to address that, we have to look at the long term, use that as our reference, in a very comprehensive way and build on that short-term innovative projects by working closely together with everybody in a very inclusive and collaborative way, but also in a transparent and accountable way of learning and building up knowledge. And only then can we build up a level of capacity. And I add to that, we also need inspiration. It is not enough to just do what we need to do. I would add a layer of innovation, inspiration, design, and capacity. And there is a reason for that. I try to unpack. One, we need these comprehensive solutions that are innovative, catalytic, pragmatic, but also touch all the boxes of the SDGs. Solutions that indeed have that capacity to go beyond vested interest, go beyond times and scale, and really connect the dots. But this level of innovation, collaboration, partnerships, design also is political in the sense that they're aspirational and inspirational. We need to be able to show a future that what needs to be done also can be done. That challenge, which is so massive, as the doom from the beginning, is not something to be scared of, but as seen as a best opportunity. And here are 3 examples from the Netherlands, the country Russell really explained. I hope you understand a little bit still where our country is. So this is the drawing from the left that comes from the University of Utrecht, Kim Cohen, assistant professor. And this is actually the coastline, the current coastline of the Netherlands. I hope you see my arrow. And Kim shows the Netherlands in 2300. So when not only climate change, made its way forward, but also he showed everything the Dutch did wrong. So this is like the fail map of the Netherlands. So all these blue lines are places where we took all the sand out of the sea to protect us from flooding. So this is what you could say the fight map of the future. We lost it. We all moved to Germany, learned German, and when Kim Cohen put this out on social media, he of one of his colleagues also put the line underneath. It's our best adaptation method to learn German, or not, something like that. The middle is the white male 50+ approach. I'm sorry, Lola, landscape architects, I don't want to insult you at all, but this is the engineering approach. This is, yes, we can fix it approach. This is the idea that there is a future we can design, engineer and build, and live with uncertainties in this very engineering, you could say modernistic approach. Perhaps it's possible. I definitely don't want to be cynical on this, but it really is about, yes, we can do everything we want and can, even if the climate is changing. And the third map is the map that is developed by Wageningen University, and that takes nature as a base. So that really looks at our natural systems, this delta the Netherlands is made from, and how can we strengthen efforts and capacity in that delta in such a way that we build a resilient country, even in the context of a changing climate. These are pathways. They are not futures. They are there to inform, together with hundreds of other scenarios that are now being developed and explored. And this is exactly what I mean by figuring out how that future worked by inspiration. There is no easy way forward. We don't know what the future of the Netherlands will be. The only way we can do it is by embracing knowledge, talent, and capacity, and using that to inform decision-making on a daily basis. It is on the shoulders of researchers, designers, entrepreneurs, people of knowledge, policymakers, NGOs, and so forth, to make sure that a societal debate on the challenges of the future is possible and that the debate is a debate where society and politics hold hands together. It's of critical importance, especially also now in the Netherlands, where we find a type of distinct between political layers, decision makers, and the challenges on the ground, that we provoke and actually inform that debate again with this way of understanding that future in a very comprehensive way, but also in aspirational, inspirational, finding ways forward, novel ways. To be able to do that, and I think this really also talks to the situation in the US, but also in other places around the world, including the Netherlands, is to bypass distrust. It's not easy to come together. And there are many theories. There is Al Mendinger and Autumn talk about soft space. MIT Sharma talks about process U. And I know Amy Chester will talk to you about Rebuild by Design next week. And what we did in New York is literally creating a safe space. Literally creating, in this case, a tent, a community center, a place where we could bring everybody together. Where there was the opportunity with people with totally different backgrounds that experienced, in this case, Hurricane Sandy in a totally different way. Politicians, investors, insurers, NGOs, activists, Occupy Sandy, people that lost everything, people that lost nothing, government official, to figure out what that future, what they could want from that future and what needed to be done to inform that future. We drafted a scheme, a different element, and Amy will talk about this a little bit more. A sidestep out of the lock-in and the distrust in society. Critical important, especially in the current times where the challenges are only bigger, challenges in society are only increasing. And there's not always this layer of capacity and a level of collaboration Russell talked about when he talked about the Netherlands. So knowing that Russell talked about the Netherlands, I can skip that. But I'm happy to answer questions on the Netherlands later. But what I will pick from his story is that well, what we try to do, and I'm actually not so sure if this is the right part, but what we did wrong in the past is that we thought that our solutions and our ideas and our culture could actually be, replicated across the world and everything would be fine. But we know every place around the world is different. It's completely different when you're on the Thai-Myanmar border, somewhere in Australia, or in New York City, or in Khulna, Bangladesh. Cultures, situations, and conditions are different. If you want to bring people together and build trust, you really have to figure out how to build a process that is tailored to the local situation. Now, that is what we did post-Hurricane Sandy. And as said, Amy Chester is going to talk to you about Rebuild by Design, so I'll definitely not do that. But I will talk to you a little bit about a process I'm involved in Asia. I actually set up. Knowing that the challenges are so massive, knowing that climate is one of the main drivers of insecurity and crisis, knowing that water is such of critical importance and how to do that right. I developed a program called Water as Leverage, using water as a mechanism to help us look at that future, bring everybody together, the polder model, and provoke and inform approaches, not so much solutions, that can then develop solutions that help change course. We looked for that at Asia, Southeast Asia, and really started science, to understand the challenges and their interdependencies in the context of these cities. And this is the map of that part of the world that shows hotspots where challenges on floods, droughts, landslides, salt intrusions, and so forth stack up. There's a long list of about 30 hotspots that are all vulnerable and increasingly vulnerable in the context of climate change that we mapped and that we put out. We selected 3 cities, Chennai in India, Khulna in Bangladesh, and Semarang in Indonesia. We had to start somewhere, where we started a process, not step by step, but again, as we did with Rebuild by Design and way back in the Netherlands, bringing the community together with experts from around the world, looking at the opportunities and challenges. We picked 6 teams that brought together local experts, international experts, financial institutes, NGOs, community activists, local commissioners, individuals, and together in teams. And I will explain one project also because of time, and that is in Chennai, and also because I find it very inspirational. This is the city of Chennai on the left. So this is the border of Chennai. Chennai is a city on the east coast of India. It is here. This is Chennai. And Chennai has a current system of scarcity. So there's a lot of water falling in a very short period of time, but because this over 10 million citizen city has a total hardened surface now, the water pollutes and flows into the ocean and you lose it. People use the aquifer, so the groundwater, they take it out, but that water is now so polluted because of all waste in the canals and in the streets, and also more saline because of saltwater intrusion. This is the situation you find. This is a very normal, beautiful, colorful images by my good friend Cynthia van Elk, who documented everything on water as leverage. But you see, if you look through the beauty, you see the disaster. So a system where population increase, economic increase only increases water demand, where because of the buildup of that city, actually, even though there's more than enough water, even in periods of drought falling in a short period of time, there's no natural system to capture that water anymore. But there is a way forward, is by mending that system again, the closed loop. And that is by focusing on nature-based solutions, solutions that come from the ground up, where they inform flood prevention, drought prevention, sanitation, and improve the urban environment by really looking at the historic tanks. These are these temple tanks that were built in the city of Chennai. They capture the water, they bring it back into the aquifer. They're totally often forgotten or don't function. We build new tanks, reforesterize part of the uplands, renaturalize the canals, build new bioswales, construct wetlands, and revitalize the old, combine solid and liquid waste recycle, and adapt our buildings. And then start to work from the community level up. And this is again where the process is important. If you do this in a comprehensive way, all of a sudden you see all these sustainable development goals being ticked by these projects. And what we do now, we start with the school, doing everything at the smallest scale with that school and the community, building the project. And from the school, we replicate it with schools across Chennai, across Tamil Nadu, and then across India, but also find ways how to scale that level of project up. The same we do in Semarang, a sinking city like Jakarta, and the same we do in Khulna in Bangladesh, where floods and droughts are happening. Water as leverage is designed as a process to build capacity, but also provoke the institutional world with solutions that really can deal with those future challenges in a very comprehensive, inclusive, and sustainable way. So this is a stepping away from the past, stepping away from vested interests. It's not easy. but there's a necessity. It was not easy in New York. Rebuild design. It's not easy in Asia, but it is of critical importance. And I'm not alone. I think the world agrees that we really have to step up our efforts for many, many reasons. I wrote a little book on my work in the US, and the 5 or 6 conclusions coming that are a little bit the threats to the talk I just gave, is that the challenge of climate and water is too big to ignore, but we really have to start to understand it. It's too big to simplify. What we like to do, we like to unpack it, but no, keep it together, embrace that complexity, the connectivity between the SDGs as our best opportunity. It cannot be dealt with our current systems. There's a failing situation, so you need to create free, soft space to build trust, but also capacity to be able to deal and come up with approaches, solutions that help us move forward. Be radically inclusive, really leave no one behind, because this can only be a collective effort. And perhaps this resonates best together with the next one, the power of innovation and design, that level of future-oriented that makes it possible to act now. There is hope, because we actually are doing it. There are many, many examples from across the world. And these 2 girls from Semarang totally understand it. She has a cap, it says future doctor. And actually the little girl had 3 reasons why she wanted that cap. One, she wanted to go to school and become a doctor, so she's very ambitious. Second, she wants to take care of people. So she already does so in her community, so social and societally driven. But third, she believes that there is a future where it's worthwhile taking care of people. So I stop here and leave it open for questions.
This is quite impressive, as we know your speeches to be, Henk. You're painting the enormity of the challenge and the enormity of what's at stake, our planet, and there's no planet B. And you're also painting the cultural depth of solidarity that is needed to achieve this. So during your talk, I was noting down we have to heal society first before we heal our coastal landscapes.
Yeah.
And that was my association, one of the associations I had with content of your talk. Thanks so much for sharing this, as you do with a number of and many influential people all over the world, and also very normal people all over the world to make a change. And so now here's the floor to the student community, hearing all this, listening to all this from all these different perspectives that you have. You might be an engineer, a law student, you might be an economy student. What are you curious about? When you hear this history that Russell was painting, the cultural differences, the enormity of the climate and water challenge, how to move from here. What would you like to know? This is your chance. Feel free to raise your hands. Oh no, we don't have digital hands. So feel free to open your microphone and be specific who you're asking your question to, and invite them to delve a bit deeper into the curiosity that you have adopted.
Terry, I would just like to say that yet again, I really encourage everyone to ask Henk the questions. They can ask me later, but they're not going to have him after this. And in particular, the Wake Forest students, I would love to see you just inundate him, flood him, as it were, with questions.
Yeah, so go ahead, open your mic, and don't be shy. This is your moment. And for the Dutch students, we had a number of questions prepared already in the hour before the session. Who? It's always the hardest for the first one.
All right, I'll start then if nobody else will.
Uh,
Oh, do we have a? Oh, go right ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Wahyu. I'm from University of Groningen. Yeah. I'm from very far major. I'm from biomolecular, but I'm really interested with this topic since I'm from Indonesia, so I know Semarang as well. Henk. And my question is about that. I read from the literature also that this climate change and also even the infrastructure planning for flood management, for example, is like very people oriented. That a politician, designer, everyone is come and go, but the people stay there. So the focus that we should like change is the society, but building for example dam or anything is very simple, like we can just build in 5 years, 10 years, but changing people is something very hard to do. Like do we still have time to do it before like this climate related catastrophic happen, and what kind of strategy that should we do to just like change the people or like accelerate people mind about this climate change and everything that we can do. Yeah, I think that's my question. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shall I immediately answer? Or
Yes, please.
Yeah. No, this is the question: how much time? And this also relates to the silver bullet. This is not about a pill or a quick fix or something that tomorrow you wake up, all of a sudden the world will be brighter. If that was the case, then we already would have done that. But so it's very granular, the change. At the same time, what you also see tipping points, as you know, we have disastrous tipping points ahead of us, probably when parts of an ice sheet melt, or you have a conflict in a region that all of a sudden, in the combination of a drought and 8 years of drought, and then in a combination of a societal uproar, creates a massive disruption. So you have tipping points on that side, and at the same time you also have tipping points upwards. I definitely think, and the scientists agree, that it is possible. 1.5 degrees still is on the table, and that is also interesting. Glasgow was not perceived as a success, and I challenged it. I was in Glasgow, and the negotiations were hard, but every scientist still agrees that with the agreement, the 1.5 degree is still on the table. We're not there. I never thought that Glasgow all of a sudden would have like this idea of a salvation. And I think we have to go beyond this idea that there, by a agreement or a solution, salvation for all will happen. It's granular. That said, it's not easy. Vested interests drive decision-making, not the understanding and embracing of that complexity. So you're right, this is not going to be easy, but it is definitely still possible. Yeah.
That's hopeful. We've got three digital...
And I could also say the other, if I look at the billions of people that lack access and safe drinking water coming out of 2 years of campaign and nothing really changed, yeah, you could say, oh, well, when are we ever going to wake up? But there's still a granular approach towards something, but we need tipping points upwards to see that change coming. That's also why programs I help or develop myself, Rebuild by Design, Water is Leverage, and so forth, are trying to build a level of concentration and focus to ensure that you can create momentums of change. And that's going to be of critical importance from across the world. Yes, I dropped a bit. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got 3 digital hands right now, so we'll take them in this order: John, Sophie, and Katerina. John.
So I have a question for Ambassador Ovink. So in Professor Shorto's 2014 New York Times profile on you, he mentions some of the challenges you faced when you were encouraging new thinking about water management in the US specifically. And some of the things that he mentions in the article are climate change deniers and people sort of dismissing your ideas because of accusations of like socialism. So I'm wondering, what are some of the strategies you can employ or you have employed when your ideas are met with strong resistance from people like that?
There is, and that was almost, this 9 years ago. One is the debate changed. In a certain way, it became harder. And you also saw it in the US with the last administration, and you still see it across that the opposites strengthen their disagreement instead of that they create an opportunity to come together. Second, there is an overwhelming more understanding of the challenges of climate change that we need to do something about. So we're in 9 years from that article, we are in a totally different world. That doesn't mean that understanding leads to the right level of action, but if you add, and this is also was part of the presentation, I skipped a little bit in the beginning, but if we look at the practices and policies in place now, if you compare it with 9 years ago, we're heading for a totally different future. 9 years ago, we were heading for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 degrees. 9 years ago, we did not have a Paris Agreement. So there is a difference. That is not the answer to your question, but just to contextualize that. I not only work in countries like the US or the Netherlands, but also work with parties that have a conflict. So in Central Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. And we never talk about it because it's better to keep this offline to make sure that there's comfortability in those conversations. But it is important to continue to bring those parties together. And one aspect is my 3 C's. Consistency, continuity, and commitment. You can also say it's the 1 S, stubbornness. You have to be really stubborn and believe that you can do this. And this is a process where you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth relentlessly. It doesn't really matter. I do this now for 7 years or more. Doesn't really matter. And you have disappointment after disappointment before you have success or agreement. Keeping focus on the cause, but also investing in the people in every aspect of them, not only in the challenge they face, but also their family, friends, their institutional backing and conditions, politics around them, and so forth, makes it possible to progress. So that is when you have time, although we don't have time, but that is, I had I traveled not a lot in the COVID pandemic, but I traveled in the fall, last fall, and I was able again to, with the 2 parties, to develop progress. When there's a pressure on it, could be a war, could be a climate disaster, and then especially the disaster brings an opportunity too. The disaster, some people say never waste a good crisis. Here you really have to be careful. I did not show the image, but Amy might talk about this. But in the context of a disaster, we too often forget that the disaster really is what the word means, a disaster. People really die. people really lose everything. You can't come in and say, oh, I have this great idea. Let's work on the future. Let's be innovative. No. So always this inclusivity, really, really listening and understanding and figuring out with that local culture what happened, what are their ideas, is of critical importance. Otherwise, forget it. Acknowledge the gap between me as a person coming from somewhere else and what is happening there. You have to invest a massive amount of time there, and that is not about jumping to conclusions. Really about investing in the people. And then the other two things I also explained in the lecture are with that commitment, that consistency and continuity, that stubbornness, and with that genuine, by the heart level of inclusivity. You really have to mean it. If I work with people and they don't mean it, forget it, doesn't work. I can't work with a team where people only do this because somebody told them to. It doesn't work. You have to be able to do this from your heart. Otherwise, in these level of challenges, it's going to be impossible. Then inclusivity starts to get a meaning, because you will be true to that cause. And with that, then you can create this space that, builds a level of trust, create time, invest in each other, where you can say, okay, but we have to go by facts. We have to look at the long term. We have to consider the interdependencies, the connectivity between those challenges, their vulnerabilities and opportunities. And we have to be able to provoke them and not the past. And this is where next to inclusivity, also long-term comprehensive and sustainability come in. And I think trying to do this over and over again is helpful. And I mean, it's not easy. The moment when you work in a country, I won't name a name, and when you work on a solution, the only thing the people you work with are interested, okay, what's in it for me, money-wise, then then you're challenged. And corruption is a critical driver in the context of investing in stupid infrastructure, but also vested interest of bigger powers are of critical importance in why the world is moving towards a certain direction. So you have to figure out a way to disentangle yourself from it. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Sophie, go ahead.
Hi, it's really nice to meet you, Mr. Ovink, and thank you so much for your presentation. So just going back to your specific example of the Indian city of Chennai, I believe it's pronounced. Yep. I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on how long does it take when implementing these reforms in the closed system that you can expect to have a city like Chennai to be completely protected by these environmental disasters, and what has the impact been, and how quickly can you expect to see change?
Yeah, good question, Sophie. I always like to reference how much time it took the Netherlands to do Room for the River. Russell showed a little bit of that. The planning for Room for the River started in the end of the 80s without a disaster, with the Plan Stork, it was called, by landscape architects, engineers, environmentalists. And they assessed our riverine delta's vulnerability and said we have to rethink how we live with the water. Then in 1995, so 6 years later, we evacuated 250,000 people because of floods that could occur. It didn't happen, but we had to evacuate the people to make sure they were out of harm's way. We drafted a law in 2006, so this is 17 years after the first plan, and started to implement the project, and we finished in 2020. Spending 2.3 billion euros on 39 projects in a riverine system like the Netherlands, without a court case, I must say, because this was a very inclusive, collaborative process. If you compare that to other infrastructure projects in the Netherlands, it was totally different. Also in the Netherlands, people don't like a road in their backyard, so they go to court. We're very normal people, you could say. But Room for the River was set up as a collaborative effort, a process where working together, coming together, creating time space of something like 5 years in the beginning to ensure that implementation was also a collective effort. But then it took for those 39 projects 2.3, 2.4 billion euros from planning all the way to implementation, 30 years. If we look at, and Amy will talk about the Rebuild by Design project that, they're being built now, but Sandy happened a little over 9 years ago. In Chennai, I don't know when the city will be totally protected, but what I do know is that there is always this mix of readiness, preparedness, and protection. And we can learn a lot from India and Bangladesh and some of the other countries in the way they are smart in early warning systems, evacuation. They evacuate 1 million people easily, even in a pandemic situation, making sure that when a disaster hits, people are not lost. To your answer, it took us 9 months to develop concepts because we used a very pressure cooker approach, where we brought together not only the communities, local stakeholders and experts, but also international partners, investors, and so forth, to see how we could get this done. After the 9 months, I think it took another 9 months to develop partnerships, to make sure that across these 3 cities, there are partnerships working on plans, programs, and projects. And now, specifically in Chennai, we were ready to build the school project 1.5 years ago, if not for COVID. 2 years ago, if 2 years and 2 months ago, if not for COVID. So the pilot funding and agreement on the site were there 2 years ago, but we have they're starting actually now. They were supposed to start 2 months ago, but the city flooded, especially the space too. But they're building it now. So we now have a delay of 2 years. Then how to scale this? This is going to take quite a bit of time. We are working in Vietnam on a project, and government, local partners and financiers said we're just going to stall it for another year or perhaps even more. And this is not what I talked about, but I'm very worried with this pandemic. What you see happening all over the world is that because there is not the opportunity to really come together, where people from around the world that actually have to work on these projects have to go into quarantine for weeks, so they don't come. We need to do something, people say, for jobs and economy. We take projects off the shelf that are actually not the projects we want to be built. So we are, putting putting the places that actually are at risks in the wrong direction. So I'm very worried of this period where we actually lose a lot of time, also in the context of the programs we're developing with What's Left. The good side is that in Bangladesh, where the situation in Khulna was a little bit different than in Chennai and Samarang, where you could say the baseline of sustainability and resiliency was not yet laid. The foundation, we had to first work on the foundation. That is going very fast. So we really see progress even within 2 years. So that is good. Yeah. But it's not easy. I wish I had a magic wand to speed and scale up all these opportunities. Yeah.
Would it be safe to say that it requires a paradigm shift, and a paradigm shift just takes long psychologically, and it takes a lot of meetings and a lot of collaboration, a lot of getting together, that is making it that time consuming and that hard in Corona times? Paradigm shifts?
Yeah, that is one. And also, I think we're online. I have to watch my word there, but we created our bureaucratic lock-in. And what I find interesting also in the US is that we have the opportunity to say, these are the rules, but this is the data, the science, and common sense. Okay, why don't we test it? No, we did the research, everybody agrees, the community says yes, the investor says yes, the politicians say yes, the science says yes, but it doesn't fit the policy. No, of course not. The policy is based on the facts of yesterday, not tomorrow. It will never fit that policy. So creating not only space to build trust, but also room for experimentation, innovation, that's possible. And I think in that sense, there are good examples coming from the US where you can say, hey, it doesn't fit the system, but you can build it anyway. If it works, that is the new normal. And I think these ways of leapfrogging to, through bureaucracy is going to be of critical importance if we want to see that change. So next to, what you rightly allude to, the shift in paradigm, also we have this stupidity of locking in bureaucracy.
A lot is frozen and taken hostage by institutions that are hard to evade.
That's interesting of what Amy will talk about with the Rebuild by Design and the President Obama's task force. President Obama, when he entered office in 2000, what was it, 8? 7? What was it?
It was 8.
8, yeah, thanks. He said, no Katrina on my watch. And he meant that I don't want to see, in the context of a disaster, a federal government that doesn't know shit what to do. We need to be ready and then be innovative and provocative. So he put together, right after Hurricane Sandy and his re-election, a presidential task force where he brought 23 federal agencies together. Unheard of, in a way bypassing the system, how the US government was organized. And with those 23 agencies, he created the opportunity to at least build a level of change. And that laid the foundation all the way into the Trump administration of adaptation measures that went beyond what President Obama ever did. And now with the Biden administration, they add a new layer to that. So but you have to have this mix of, saying, yes, we have to do this differently, and yes, we can do it. It's always possible.
And the root challenge and the root cause and the root solution is in the processes and in how things are organized.
And it doesn't matter what you use and say as an excuse. I remember Prime Minister Balkenende, who was our prime minister in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina happened in the US. And he asked his cabinet in the Netherlands, are we ready for a Katrina? And everybody was taken by surprise because this was not, it was like in a cabinet. So what did he say? Are we ready? No, wait, we don't know. 2005, we didn't know. So we put together a commission. So we used Katrina as an opportunity, a disaster in the US, an opportunity to inform a provocation of the existing institutions. And we set up a new law, the Delta law, that went way beyond what we had then and said, okay, this law will always look 100 years ahead. There will always be money in the bank to implement the projects. The projects will be programmed for the next 15 to 50 years. And there is nothing to stop it because the responsibility for that does not lie with the minister, but with a commissioner, a Delta commissioner. He or she is in charge to run this program. And I think, using Katrina to set up something novel that really bypasses the systems to ensure that that future is part of what we do, and then mainstream that in existing policies is an example on that. A great example.
We're going to see next week how a system can be in the way of very good ideas and innovation. Catharina Hoke, one other time.
Yes, thank you very much, first of all, for the presentations. And as an economics student, like my question always is if actually the economic system we have, aka capitalism, is really the best to implement all these policies, because capitalism based on growth and consumption and more. And I often feel like this system, especially in the United States, to be honest, is failing all these ideas that we have, that we need to like reduce maybe what we are doing and like getting down with what we are doing right now.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't blame the US for this. It is across the world, even in countries that we don't think are capitalist, but single-focused profit approach won't do the trick. A value-based approach across SDG. If you look at the SDGs, that is an anti-capitalism agenda. So I think you got your answer there. It's interesting that all the countries in the world signed up on the SDGs. Almost all. I think we lost one or two, but that's okay. So did they really understand what they signed up of? It's interesting with the Paris Agreement, which is in the Netherlands was the first country, but after that others followed, where we had a court case. So we signed the Paris Agreement saying the world cannot be warmer than 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degree post-industrial levels. And we will do everything we can in our capacity, in our own country, but also in providing the rest of the world, the developing world, funding and capacity, loss and damage, as well as funding, to ensure that we can deal with it. Urgenda, a Dutch NGO, went to court and said the government is not doing enough to protect its citizens in the context of the Paris Agreement in preventing the impacts of climate change. It went all the way to the highest court, and with every decision, they were given the right. So Urgenda is right. The court ruling all the way up says, yes, the government is not doing enough. So now by law, by a legal decision, the government has to speed up its efforts, which it is doing. We have a new government. In the government agreement, it really says, we even have to outperform that Paris agenda, So all the ambitions are there now. It really depends on the implementation. But yes, it is possible. So I'm still waiting the first SDG court case. Because in the context of your question, it would be very interesting if a group of economists that believe in this value-based approach could challenge countries that signed the SDGs, but are not following through on that comprehensive agenda. I'm not sure where that will lead us. But it's interesting, even theoretically, not even in a real court, of course, but even as a theoretical case, you could perhaps practice this and then say, hey, we do this, but not by law, but there is this footprint mechanism, overshoot day, World Overshoot Day, where we actually look every year, country overshoot day, sorry, where we actually look at the aspects of using resources and where that would lead the world. And I have it. I can share it, but it's you can find it. But if the world would live like the United States, our resources would be finished by March 14 of every year in 2021. The Netherlands, April 27, so we're a little bit. May 5 is Germany, but you can better live in Indonesia. It's December 18. So it a little bit shows how we're off track in the context of those SDGs. We do footprint networking. We have CDP is an organization that actually does this accountability tracking for businesses, private sector, and government. So yes, there are many, many ways, many instruments already to your case. But it would be interesting, Katerina, if you can turn this into a research. Yeah, I look forward. Yeah.
Would you say, in the vein of Katerina's question, that the more capitalist a country is, the harder it will be to generate the solidarity to come up with real solutions? Is it harder in a capitalist country? Is it easier?
I don't know. Because I think there is not, I think this is, I don't believe in simplicity. I don't think you can brand a country only by capitalism. There are many more aspects. I can actually imagine there might be a capitalist country that has other cultural values that actually makes it possible to deliver change next to a less capitalistic countries without those values where change will never happen. So I think, and I always am very careful that you say one brand and then it will never happen. I think there's so many aspects. It's the same as there's now a debate on Twitter by 2 articles, and it's ongoing. It's about water wars. Some people say that wars are caused by water. Never. There's always a myriad, the complexity. Syria or Jordan faced the same drought. Jordan didn't get, Assad was not, a totally different situation. So there are so many aspects that have to come together to create disruption in the right or in the wrong way, that it cannot, but it is an ingredient for sure. Yeah. And it can help in the right or the wrong way for sure. But the complexity is much bigger.
Ryan has a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, so you just talked about sort of how the economic structure plays a role in this topic. How do you think, is it possible to depoliticize the topic of climate change in the United States? Because I feel like that's a major barrier for that complete solidarity.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when I worked for the Obama administration, there was a Sandy task force, but there was also a climate task force. A task force consisting of governors and mayors from Republican and Democratic background. And in the last meeting in the White House, President Obama joined the meeting, and he went around the room asking, in a conversation, their biggest worries and so forth. And then one of the governors, I forgot his name, asked the president back and said, what keeps you awake? And it was really about this question, Ryan. He said, if I start to talk about climate change, it's about impeachment or something else. It immediately is politicized. If you start to talk about not climate change but a new economy, a new society where there's jobs and opportunities, it's not so much about the politics but about the opportunities. But that demands a level of willingness. I think, and also to the earlier question on the economics, it's not because we can deal with climate change that all of a sudden we go bankrupt, or we all fall into poverty, or nothing is happening anymore. No, not at all. Costa Rica is a great example, and there are many more around the world that understanding risks of climate and understanding values and bringing them into the equation is a different way of organizing your society. But it doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden a situation where things are, no, on the contrary, it's a situation where there's happiness and health and well-being. And there are many examples of that. So I think the depoliticizing of that goes by the examples of where it works. Then again, politics are never ideology anymore. I wish they were, Ryan, because if it was about ideology, then it would be interesting to have a conversation. They are driven by interests. And I think this is where the challenge lies. It's not so much about depoliticizing. Perhaps we should politicize the climate debate again and take it away from the vested interest and make it an ideological, value-based conversation. So that is, I think, a bigger challenge now. And there is a historic line to that vested interest, because The global north has a massive amount of vested interest in the wrong economy, not only in the global north, but also in the global south. And unraveling and untangling those layers and is complex, but that is not about politics, that is about interest. That's not about the ideology of politics. Interest is also politics, but it's not about the ideology of politics.
Isn't it also the case that, you know, why it's so hard politically is that a large amount of the narrative says we have to stop doing a lot of things that we like doing. And there's not a narrative yet that paints a new society that we're drawn to.
Yeah, you need the alternative. That's a little bit what we do with Rebuild and Water's Leverage. And you don't say it's impossible, but you create an alternative which is possible. An alternative where things change and you do things differently. But there are many opportunities for many.
Yeah, and then a story that has appeal, that makes, then we get a government that makes us long for something, instead of a government that makes us stop doing bad stuff. And that's a different kind of ideology that is more about appeal than of policing and suppressing.
Yeah, it's for sure a good idea. Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Maybe we
Russell.
will get...
writes the story.
The narrator, the storyteller.
Yeah, that's a good story.
Students, any other students with questions coming up from what you heard in the discussion? You're still welcome.
I'm still awaiting Russell's question because he had one in the beginning.
Oh, I've got a whole list of questions. For one thing, I just want to say that, you know, I am still trying to recover from your opening image of the dry earth and the little tiny bubbles of water. I haven't seen that before, but that is just staggering. One very specific question. You early on, I didn't quite get what your statistic was. You were saying 9.9 out of $10 was spent related to water or something. I didn't understand that. It seemed important, but I didn't get it.
So the Climate Change and Land report shows that the majority of our investment actually increases climate change. And the way how we spend it increases our vulnerability. So that is the 99% of our investments, you know. So the 1% is where the opportunities for that change lie. The question is, how can we replicate and scale? And how can we turn 1 into 2, 2 into 4, 4 to 16, and then we have a majority with the next step. And that is where the opportunity lies. It's not impossible, but this is where the shift happens. And it depends on Katarina's new economic model and many others. And Ryan's new politics on the goals, sustainable development goals, and so forth. So I think with a group like this, we can easily start to develop such an approach. Yeah.
And it depends on what you were just talking about. That is coming up with new incentives or alternatives rather than saying, no, don't do that.
Right.
Reading alternative stories. Okay, I guess we're going to wrap up now. People might have other appointments, other activities. One last round, also including Russell. Sorry, Russell. For a last set of, or last objective, or maybe just observation of what you took out of this. Who wants to make a last remark?
Oh, go ahead.
Russell? No, Russell, go ahead.
Well, 2 points that you made, Henk. You gave an elegant, long answer to a question, but there were, in my mind, it could have been reduced. It shouldn't have been, but it could have been reduced to 2 words: stubbornness and caring, in terms of how to proceed with this. You know, people involved in this have to actually passionately want to, you know, to see the enormity of it and want to be a part of it. And the other is stubbornness. How you can continue to, you know, come back to more and more meetings and figure out how to do it via Zoom and just not let go because there's no other way forward. That's, to me, that's almost the main thing that I've taken from your talk, because there's no simple magic bullet, as you said. So therefore, if you have those things, then that allows you to deal with infinite complexity.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I have nothing to add. Yeah. And I think, yeah, in a way it's true. Perhaps the thing with that, don't do it alone. Always build families, friends, communities, coalitions, partnerships of the willing or the less willing, to make sure that you continue to be able to do this. And I think that is perhaps the part that is driving that level of stubbornness, is that I work in places where vulnerability is very high, where people are really at risk, where you not often can come or go. And then I remember when Kulna was hit again by a cyclone. I was texting with Mr. Abir, my friend in Kulna, my counterpart I worked with, and a day, nothing. And then he texted me back and he said, Mr. Henk, I'm okay. I said, oh, Mr. Abir, yes, the mangroves saved Kulna city. It resonated. A couple of things is that it's a friendship you almost build up professionally, a partnership, and now with these offline, with these meetings, these online meetings, I become emotional. If you meet them, you don't see them for months, and then you see them only on the screen, and then it's almost like bringing together a whole family. And then hearing what they're doing, what they're at, and the progress without you being there, or but I think next to the stubbornness, it is really about the heart, and it is really about the people you work with. Have the guts to build a family. I think you have to be able to dare to do it. I guess. And that demands a level of vulnerability on all sides, which is not easy. But the return is amazing. Yeah.
Isn't that also not where the paradigm shift happens, in the hearts?
Yeah. The minds are okay. Yeah, don't worry. The minds are okay. We can deal with everything. Yeah. It's the heart.
See, I thought this was going to be a really technical thing, and you end up with all this mushy heart kind of stuff.
Yeah, it can't go without. It is both. But there's this stupidity in management, is that measure so you can manage it. No. Yeah, you need to be able to measure it and to value it. If not, forget it. Then you go nowhere. It's nowhere.
That also resonates with the design literature that says it's more about sense making together than about solution finding in a technical way. You first have to find the words, the meanings in what is happening around us, instead of finding the technical measures and the golden bullets. The silver bullets, sorry.
Silver. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have to leave you with those deep thoughts that surfaced in this discussion we had. Thanks so much again, Henk Ovink. It was a very great pleasure again to meet and to lavish yourselves at your wisdom and at your stories. Thanks so much again, Russell Shorto, for indulging us with this deep historical view into two cultures evolving in separate ways. And this is kind of the groundwork for what we're going to get into next times, more into the local processes that have been attempting to find ways out of coastal vulnerability, And third week, also the cultural differences in these big institutions that see it as their responsibility to have a role in this. And what are these cultures and how do they change and how can they change further in order to avoid stupid solutions, as Henk calls them, and transcend into more rich and multiple use, multiple value kind of solution.
Terry, if I could just thank Henk as well, so much appreciated, and I'm sure all the students got a lot out of it. Thank you for your time. And if I can just say to the Wake Forest students who are still on the session, give me 1 hour and I will post the assignment for next week. And please do read the readings because they will relate to next week's speakers.
Same for my students. We'll keep each other sharp. Well, most of us are going to see each other in the next 2 weeks again. Henk is also always very welcome, but also has a double-packed agenda always. So maybe we shall meet again at some point. Henk, yep. would the students also be welcome to still have email contact with you for specific questions?
Yeah, questions, stuff like that. Always
share your address.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And I'm looking forward to next week already.
Yeah, very good. Thanks so much, Russell, and Terry and the team for organizing, Saskia for your support, and of course the students.
Christina, thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Christina. Okay, take care and have fun with Amy next week. She's amazing. Yeah.
We will.